One of India's pioneering photographers who was active in the 1860s and 1870s was a Maharaja of Jaipur, Maharaja Sawai Ram Singh II. He wasn't just a collector like other Maharajas, he was actually a practitioner. And there were a number of people who met him and who recorded this, saying he's a wonderful, skilled photographer. And it was only in the 1980s that then director and curator of the City Palace Museum opened this store and found this fantastic material, this huge archive of particularly his photographic equipment and 2,000 glass plate negatives. And what they did at that time, my predecessors, is they made some enlargements to display in the museum, and they published some scholarly articles. This created a kind of flurry of interest in Sawai Ram Singh as a photographer.
My association with the City Palace Jaipur began with photographs. It was a documentation project. We began with the printed material and then moved on to working on the glass plate negatives, and these quickly captured our imagination. We referred to it as the Sawai Ram Singh archive. We think he took most of the pictures, he or his studio. There are certainly some materials in there by other photographers, and one of the questions we're asking is, how did he get them? Why did he get them? Is this common practice in the 19th century amongst amateur photographers? It is also unique because of the access that Sawai Ram Singh II had to people and places. Being the ruler of Jaipur, he could go anywhere, photograph where he wanted to within the city palace or the city of Jaipur itself. Visitors to his state, dignitaries like the Prince of Wales or fellow rulers like Maharana Sajjan Singh of Mewar, or his brother-in-law Maharaja Jaswant Singh of Jodhpur. When he wanted to take a picture, they were less likely to object. Also, he could access the women in the Zanana and use them as models in his compositions. And so there's a whole range of sitters, and there's also evidence of a personal, individual sort of touch, which is unique for its time. These are not the days of photojournalism, we must remember. So images that seem to convey some sort of element of the personality of the sitter are quite special. And the thing is that Sawai Ram Singh II is less well known compared to many of his contemporaries. And so for us at Jaipur, it has been somewhat an ambassadorial mission to get him better known. And in that, we have had a number of willing collaborators, including friends at the Al-Qazi Foundation, with whom we've done a couple of exhibitions that use Ram Singh's work.
This extraordinary collection, I think it's been on the minds of so many art historians and so many sort of thinkers around lens-based practices more generally. And I think it brings to the fore, at least for us from the archive, this sort of generative or regenerative quality that the archive has. We talk about majoritarian histories, we talk about subaltern histories. I'd like to think perhaps somewhere that kind of tipping point happens with someone like Ram Singh, perhaps. And this performative aspect is also played out, I think, by this juxtaposition with Nandan Ghia's work. I mean, we're thinking again in visual art more generally, and I guess questions of identity with questions of sovereignty, thinking about how memorabilia and people's private collections have become very important sort of narratives to hold up a mirror to, as opposed to the grand narratives that we have. And unearthing this archive, I think somewhere Ram Singh's everyday life, which was quite extraordinary, has also been about him going into the city, encountering people. And what I found most enamoring about him to an extent is that he finally turns the lens on himself.
So the objective that we in the museum have, is to establish Sawai Ram Singh's reputation as a major Indian artist of the 19th century. A number of images where Ram Singh is photographing other works of art. He was also exploring the potential photography to represent other forms of art. There are images here of sculpture, of paintings. Here is Raphael, a photograph of a print of Raphael's famous Sistine Madonna. It's actually one of the most reproduced paintings in the world.
The fun of collaborating is also that we get new perspectives on these objects. I mean, every time we look at them, we learn something new, or we spot something new, or learn to ask new questions, but also we see them differently.
Of After all, history is somewhat severed from the contemporary, and how do we make it our own and how do we engage with it? We've learned how to dismantle particular monoliths. And I think maybe the archive then is an invitation for deconstruction, is an invitation for interpretation.
I think the work of Nandan Gier is particularly interesting because here is a contemporary practitioner working in Jaipur who's engaged with history. And so again, there's a sort of dialogue between Nandan Gier's take on the late 19th century and Ram Singh's take on it.
At the beginning of experimenting with the old photographs, my concern was to find this visual language which was rooted in reality and tradition, but was evolving, disintegrating into something that's contemporary, something that's now. And you could say that these works are like a disjointed, evolving, mutating self.